Hello, it's Daniel here from Slogans Theatre. Welcome to the video. It's been a long time since I made a video, so I'm celebrating by putting my mic through enormous ghostly reverb. I was partly inspired to make this video by my brother, who is also a musician. He works a lot with what he calls deconstructive composition, or decomposition, which is a very theory-rich and music theory-rich area, sometimes difficult to get a grasp on, although the results are often very interesting. Anyway, a recent acquisition of a Verbos Electronics Sawtooth Stack gave me an insight into a number of things my brother was talking about to do with tuning and detuning and temperament. So I thought I would make a walkthrough and a little listen to this absolutely astonishing module from Verbos Electronics. A couple of things to say about Verbos Electronics before we get started. Their modules are not cheap. This module will set you back just short of €900. It is a standalone synth voice with MIDI input. It will work outside a modular environment. It will also be very well integrated into one. And of course, especially Verbos's own West Coast Buchla style modular environment. And I found it works very well with a number of my other modules, especially ones that add effects. It really pushes effects very interestingly. But it is expensive. On the other hand, there is evidence that Verbos Electronics modules do not depreciate. In fact, some of them become more valuable with time. Perhaps this one will too, and it'll turn out to be an investment. In any case, it's certainly a musical investment, and it's probably not an unwise purchase in the end. But let's see. It's certainly very pleasing so far. And the other thing to remember about the Verbos Electronic modules is the sound. To say they sound good like a synthesizer sounds good is somehow missing the point. They sound good like a waterfall or a thunderstorm or a gunfight or a explosion sounds. They are both a force of nature and a force of technology, like a jet engine. And they are something to be reckoned with. They're something very, very special. So before we have a listen, I'll just walk us through what's going on. I would draw attention to Mark Verbos's own extremely interesting short documentary about this module, where he talks about the origin story and his interest in a famous or legendary patch made in California on a Buchla system in the early 70s, and trying to recreate this as a single module, or make something new based on some of the ideas from this famous patch. And he talks very interestingly in the possibility of getting the range of sounds he does without using filters, which of course in strict West Coast style this module has no filters as such. But one of the interesting things about it is that the way the harmonics work often sounds rather filter-like. So when you're sweeping between a sawtooth and a sine wave, it can have the effect or the feeling of a filter without actually using a filter. So it's very interesting, and this draws attention, I think, to the way the module in general often does very familiar sounding things in a very unfamiliar way, which somehow makes them familiar and unfamiliar at the same time, which is very fascinating, very inspiring. Okay, so let's go from left to right. We have two identical looking envelopes. In fact, they are identical except in one respect. They are normaled differently. So envelope 1 is normaled to the richness parameter in the harmonics, and envelope 2 is normaled to the amplitude of the output, which, by the way, is in stereo. And this is extremely important about how many of the functions of the module work, and how the sound comes to life. Okay, next we have the rather modestly described oscillators. So this is the stack. These are the 5 oscillators. It comes complete with a very handy auto tune, because there's a good deal of natural instability within the Sawtooth Stack, which is part of its appeal. But sometimes it's good to make sure you have a good reference point for a beginning, because things can get pretty wild out there when it comes to pitch, frequency, and harmonics. We, of course, also have the MIDI input there, and very handily you can see the MIDI input is here, but also MIDI control numbers are put above each parameter, which is extremely useful, I must say. Saves you having to make a cheat sheet or constantly look things up in a manual. So very good idea there. Yes, I mean the oscillators also have a volt per octave input. So of course you can use quantized voltage, play melodies as you like, or unquantized. And here we have 2 CV inputs for the frequency, so you can put various kinds of LFOs or sample and hold, or whatever you like, whatever kind of CV input you like, and come up with these amazing negative and positive effects, because you have these attenuators here that can work in opposition to each other or stacked on top of each other, or as you like. It's very exciting, and brings into question what we mean by frequency with the synthesizer, which we'll see is very important with the spread function coming next with the stack. So this is how we look at the stack. It's difficult to describe what this dial does. It also has CV input, of course. So it seems to begin with what feels like kind of quite classic unison style synth output, then gets very hoovery, and then turns into something I don't quite know how to describe it. It seems to make these vast chords, but they're made out of swarms of what feel to me like almost like shepherd tones, things moving in different directions. And it's very difficult to say what is a high pitch and what is a low pitch in terms of the chord structure, if that's what it is. And the structure itself seems unstable, so you hear what may appear to be a minor 7th chord, let's say, but as soon as you focus in on it, it seems to be turning into something else. It is really quite difficult to describe what this does. I'm sorry for not being more technical. I think actually, to be fair, anyone who uses that spread function is entitled to come up with their own description. Mark Verbos does offer a much more technical description in the video I mentioned, which I will add the link in the description, because it's excellent to look at it in any case. And he, of course, describes much more technically what the spread function does. But I'm thinking more about what it feels like to actually dial it in and see what happens, let alone use it with modulation. Okay, then we have the harmonics section. So here we have timbre on the right, which sweeps between a sine wave and a sawtooth. And this is a very, very broad range, and to this we add what's called richness, which I guess is harmonic richness, and this can move from phaser-like stretching sounds to absolutely bonkers frequency modulation, like quite harsh things, and everything in between, and more. And using it in conjunction with a spread is just astonishing. And then we have the output here. So we have the amplitude, so we can make drones. We have the output level overall. We have the CV for an envelope for the amplitude. And then we have the left-right out. So I've extremely simply just patched it to the output of the nifty keys. So let's have a listen. I'll begin just with a very, very low sine tone. You're probably going to need some decent headphones or monitors just to get the beginning of this. So what is very interesting, and this will become obvious when I turn the frequency up a little bit, is that it's not entirely stable between the left and right. We have quite a lot of movement between left and right, which is very interesting. So there's no modulation as such, but because of the spread of the oscillators, they are of course causing a good deal of movement. So I'll just turn that frequency up, and I think that should be a bit more obvious now. I'll just get that level down a little bit. Yeah, so you can feel this left-right motion. I do recommend headphones for that, actually. So this is just the plain sine tone, apparently, and we've already got a hell of a lot of information. We can, of course, add the spread to this, and yeah, here's the journey. So yeah, this definitely has a 50s lab feel to it. Magical. Okay, so if we start to bring in a little bit of the movement towards the sawtooth, and then this richness. Yeah, so you can see we can get really quite intense. And I would add that as that intensity increases, the overall level does not in terms of gain, and yet there's a massive increase of intensity. In fact, as I look at the level on the blue box, it slightly dips overall, which seems astonishing. So if we leave that about here, and I just fire off envelope 1, which is normal to this richness feature. Well, you can hear what's going on there. A lot of action. Now, we had a little bit of spread here. Yeah, this is this. You see what I mean about this shepherd Tony thing? Or am I just being crazy? I would suggest, to put it in my brother's terms, the natural distinction between high and low pitches is somewhat deconstructed here. Yes, so astonishing wealth of harmonic material, both in terms of tonality and waveform harmonics. In fact, maybe we could also argue that this module deconstructs the difference between the two. So, yes, that is just a very quick demonstration of the massively rich world of the Sawtooth Stack. So, yeah, I'm very, very excited about it. As I said earlier in a different context, it has both a slightly familiar and extremely unfamiliar sound quality to it, which I guess is something about the Verbos ethos. That's a slightly bit of a tongue twister, between looking back to classic West Coast Buchla synthesis and making these very futuristic machines, futuristic certain in terms of inspiring music. So just to finish, I'm going to plug in a couple of cycling envelopes from Maths, just to do a very short demo, excuse me, of the CV inputs on the frequency. So we'll take that all the way down. And I'll just see what happens. Thanks very much for watching.